Hi everybody, my name is Charlotte Stirling-Reed. I'm a registered nutritionist and I am the nutrition consultant for Zebedees. I've just come to Zebedees HQ here in the beautiful countryside in Sussex to deliver a webinar all about weaning babies in a nursery setting. I really hope you enjoy it. For those of you who've not met me before, my name is Charlotte Stirling-Reed. I am the Baby and Child Nutritionist and I am also Zebedees Consultant Nutritionist. And I've been working for Zebedees for about 4 years now. I absolutely love them. I love what they do. I've always been incredibly impressed with the food they produce and how they produce it. And hopefully for a lot of you here, I know you'll be nurseries that actually use Zebedees quite a lot and hopefully you'll be super impressed too. But for those of you who aren't, please do feel free to get in touch with Zebedees or myself and ask any questions about it, because we would love to be able to tell you all about what they do, how they can help nursery settings as well. So this workshop that I'm going to be running today is all about purees, weaning, baby-led weaning in a nursery setting. I'm going to be talking a lot about things like textures, finger foods, what the recommendations are for weaning, and we're also going to talk at the very end about choking and gagging. I know that's something that a lot of parents and nursery staff are going to be a little bit worried about and that we want to be making sure we address here. So we're going to talk a lot about that and hopefully give you plenty of confidence with that topic too. As I've already said, I'm a registered public health nutritionist. I did an undergraduate, postgraduate degree in nutrition, and then I trained for around about 3 years with the NHS around the topic of baby, toddler, child nutrition and pregnancy, and I absolutely love it. It's my favourite topic in the world to talk about. Since then I've been a freelancer, worked with lots of companies and lots of brands, and I also have 3 books out on different topics, so one on weaning, one on fussy eating and toddlers, and one on feeding your family. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and as I said, I've been working with Zebedees for around about 4 years as their nutrition consultant. First of all, what we're going to be talking about today is weaning. Now, for many of you, when you think about weaning, what you'll be thinking about is the idea of giving babies food. And you may be thinking about the idea that actually when we're giving babies food, we need to do it because they need the nutrients. But there is so much more to weaning than just this. There are so many more reasons why we need to introduce solid foods to baby. And I'm going to go over some of those right now because I think it's really important for us to understand what weaning is, to understand why it's important and how to do it properly. So, lots and lots of advice around weaning has changed as well in the last, I'd say 5-10 years. There's been a huge wave of difference in the way that we recommend weaning babies, and hopefully you'll pick that up as I go through the rest of this webinar. But some of the reasons why weaning is really important is not just for offering nutrients, which I have to say are important, because at around about 4 to 6 months of age, babies start to lose their stores of iron that they've got from birth, from mum during pregnancy. They start to lose that and they need that to be replaced in their diet. So things like iron and zinc are very important. But aside from nutrition, there are so many other reasons. So for example, just like walking, crawling, talking, potty training, weaning and learning to eat is a milestone that children have to learn. They have to understand how to do this. And so what we need to do is we need to help teach babies to eat. This means developing oral motor function. This means that we can help them to learn to bite, chew, swallow pieces of food. This means that weaning is there to help them learn hand-eye coordination and be able to learn how to self-feed themselves. So there are plenty of reasons why weaning is important from a developmental point of view. And personally, I think this often gets quite lost. We don't ever think about the fact that actually we need to offer babies that food for those reasons. And sometimes we just expect them to be able to eat like this, but actually it can be quite a long journey. And depending on where babies are when they start and how well developed their oral motor skills or their hand-eye coordination is, it may take them a little bit longer, or it might actually be quite a quick journey for them as well. The other thing is, around the weaning age, we talk about this as being a window of opportunity. The reason we say this is because actually between the ages of around 6 months and a year, babies are a lot more receptive to trying something new, to exploring a bit more. For those of you who work in a nursery setting, you'll probably be very aware that once children get to between about 1 and 3, you can come across them wanting to be a lot more independent. You can come across a lot more of food refusal, and they're often a lot less willing to try new things. So this age between about 6 months and 12 months of age is a window of opportunity when we can get them to try lots of new things. So this means offering lots of variety, and it means offering lots in the way of textures. So textures are super important for babies, and we'll come on to talk about that a little bit more. So also weaning is important for building new routine, just simply teaching them about food and showing that food is important as part of our day. Exposure to plenty of flavours, and as I've said, also, of course, nutrients are an important part of that as well. Lastly, as well, there's a lot of learning that happens with food. So we learn about culture, we learn about how other people eat, we learn about balancing our plates out and what are foods that we should be eating more of and what are foods that we should be eating less of. So there's a lot of stuff that happens around the weaning stage, and a lot of learning. So it isn't just about those nutrients that we eat. So what are we talking about when we talk about weaning? Well, I'm a big fan of starting weaning. So the very, very first part of a weaning journey is kicked off by offering plenty of vegetables, and starting with what I call veg-led weaning. Now, again, if you go back about 5 years, you probably would find that actually most of what people were recommending and most of what was being offered was fruits. And the reason for that is because babies are actually born with a preference for sweet foods. They are more likely and they are programmed to enjoy sweeter tastes. And that's because in nature, actually, sweet things tend to come along with a lot of nutrients. So things like blueberries or strawberries or, fresh fruits, they tend to be sweet, but they're very fibrous and they're very nutrient rich. So it makes sense for children to be born enjoying sweet foods. But actually, we live in a society now where a lot of the sweet foods available to us actually don't come with a lot of nutrients or a lot of fibre. They're not so beneficial for our health. So what we want to try and do is encourage babies to enjoy a wide variety of flavours. And this is where the concept of veg-led weaning has come in. Offering a variety of vegetables, which are bitter, savoury, umami, have lots of different flavour profiles within them, is a really good way of, like we said in the last slide, exposing baby to a variety of different flavours. And we know that when children are exposed to foods and become familiar with them, they're so much more likely to accept them now and later on. And this is where the concept of veg-led weaning comes in. The more veggies we can encourage children to have when they're younger and try and taste and get all those flavours on their tongue, the more likely they are going to be to accept them later. If we go straight in with the sweet food, what we're doing is reinforcing the preferences. And it means that actually they might carry on enjoying that sweet food and be less inclined to try the variety of other flavours in the foods that we want them to eat. And variety is really, really key when children and babies are young. So I hope that all makes sense in terms of veg-led. Now, having said that about veg-led weaning, you absolutely don't have to start with veg. In the UK, it's quite a popular method and it's something that I talk about a lot, but there's no reason that you absolutely have to do it. It's just one idea and one concept. If you want to offer other things like sweeter foods or fruits, absolutely fine. But it is really recommended to try and vary the flavours that you expose little ones to. If you start weaning and it's all pears and apples and bananas and soft fruits, then actually it's going to be much harder to try and get them to accept a variety of the kinds of foods that we eat as adults later on. So really, really good to carry on with that variety. Try not to be afraid of offering those strong flavours, even if you get an initial reaction of babies who really don't like it or pull really strong faces. It doesn't necessarily mean they don't like it. It might just be a surprise, a bit of a shock, not what they are expecting. Or it might just be that they've never had that taste before and so they're not really sure what to make of it. It doesn't mean that they don't like it. Also, during the first part of weaning, it's really, really important to try and include iron-rich foods. Now, I talked a little bit about the importance of nutrients and I talked a little bit about how iron is key. This starts to really deplete in young weaning babies. So we do need to make sure that things like meat, lentils, beans, pulses are all included in children's weaning diet. And again, I'll come to talk a little bit about Zebedees and Zebedees, the purees that they have on offer now. But a lot of the purees that Zebedees are offering do make sure they are balanced and they include plenty of those iron-rich foods to help babies to become accustomed to them and for them to become the norm and familiar, but also to make sure that we're offering a source of that iron in the foods that they're having at nursery. Also, just to say, you don't need the same food multiple days in a row. This is a really old myth that was never really advice, but actually what a lot of other countries sometimes recommend is offering 3 foods in a row every single day, the same food, and before you move on to another food. That isn't what we recommend in the UK or in the US, because we want more variety to be included. So we need to try and knock that idea on its head. And you certainly don't need to start with baby rice for the exact same reason. Variety is what is important. Now, this is where we get on to the really important part about what I'm going to be talking about today, the textures, the finger foods. Again, probably about 3 years ago, a concept in the UK became really popular when it came to weaning, which is called baby-led weaning. And this is essentially where you offer your baby pieces of food. It can even be pieces of the food that you're having as an adult with your adult meal. We're offering baby pieces of food, and we're allowing them to self-feed and eat those pieces of food right from the very start of weaning. They still need to be safe. They still need to be soft and squidgeable between your finger and thumb. But offering them pieces of food and allowing them to self-feed themselves does seem to have benefits. It can help them with hand-eye coordination. It can help them with that oral motor skill that I talked about before, the biting, the chewing, helping babies to learn how to swallow pieces of food. So all of that is really, really key when it comes to baby-led weaning. And you possibly in your nursery might have a lot of parents who will come in, whether they're kind of starting nursery already or whether they're new babies who come in, who will be practicing baby-led weaning. And you might have some parents are really quite strong on the idea that they want to be only baby-led weaning, but actually I'm a massive fan of a best of both. And the reason for this, traditional puree-led or spoon-led weaning, whichever you want to call it, is where you're offering baby foods that have been either blended or mashed really well, and you're offering them to baby off of a spoon. There are lots of benefits of this method too. So for example, you can add lots more variety because you can blend lots more foods together. You can take a whole adult meal, and as long as there's no salt in that, you could easily blend that up and offer that to baby, for example. Also, you can teach babies how to use utensils and use cutlery, and you can still teach them self-feeding if they're using a spoon, but by just allowing them to grab the spoon off you and feed themselves. So there's still benefits to purees, and for me, it's a bit of a best of both approach. There's no one or the other. We shouldn't be just doing baby-led or just purees. There is a real benefit to trying to do both. So in the Zebedees puree boxes that we send out and in all of our recommendations, we do suggest finger foods that you could and should offer alongside them, because actually finger foods can be really important for babies alongside having those purees. But there's no reason to do one or the other. A real benefit of having a best of both approach and allowing your baby, because babies change all the time. One day they might really be preferring finger foods, and the next day they might think, do you know what, I really fancy something off a spoon right now. And for me, true baby-led weaning is allowing them to decide and giving them the option and giving them the option to have that best of both approach. So, sorry, I'm just trying to move on in these slides. So when it comes to textures, now hopefully you can see this on the screen, but if you do want us to send you this presentation or even just some of the images from there, it might be beneficial to you to be able to have a look at. So when it comes to textures of the purees, what actually are we talking about? Well, to start with, you absolutely could offer your baby the babies that you're setting a really thin puree that kind of dribbles off of a spoon. You can see the one in this very top here. You can see that's quite liquidy. That's essentially been carrots and broccoli that's been cooked really well, that's been softened, and that's been blended up with quite a large amount of liquid, so that when you're drizzling off the spoon, quite a lot comes off. The next one, if you look to the right, you can see there is a bit more of a mash. So what we've got there is a bit less liquid. It's still been blended, but it hasn't been blended and mixed with lots and lots of water, so it's really liquidy. It's more likely to dollop off of that spoon. You've then got another texture which is a bit more mash now. So maybe it's had a bit of a blend. It's really soft. Carrot and broccoli, it's had a bit of a blend, but again, this would definitely be falling off the spoon in dollops. And the last one is more just kind of chopped textures. We'll talk about further textures a bit later on, but these kind of 4 stages are not necessarily every single baby will move through them. Quite a few babies won't even need the very first, very drizzly puree. They might be able to go just straight onto mashes. So you can start offering baby those, especially if they're quite accustomed or they've really taken to those finger foods. So you don't need to start with a very thin puree. And in terms of babies moving through these textures, they are all going to move through at very, very different paces and very different rates. And this is one of the reasons why it's super important for us to be trying to communicate with the parents of children at nursery, so we can see what kind of stage are those babies on? What kind of transition in terms of those meals? Even if you have something like an image that you can ask a parent to point out to you, what are the kind of textures that your baby's having at the moment? When it comes to these textures, it's actually really important to try and encourage babies to move through them quite quickly. The reason for this, we know from research that around about 9 months of age, if babies haven't been exposed to lumps and bumps and chunks in their food, they actually can be a little bit delayed in terms of their acceptance and their oral motor skills and their eating abilities. So we need to be making sure that babies being exposed to all of this wide variety of textures before they get to 9 months of age. Some babies will move through this very, very quickly. And within a couple of months, they might be on more mashed and chopped foods. Some babies will move a little bit more slower than that. So it's all about going at their pace, but we do want the encouragement for them to be moving through these. And even if that means talking to parents, trying to encourage them, showing them visuals, giving examples, and trying to encourage them to move on, because it just helps babies to learn to eat. And that in and of itself, at a nursery setting, will also help you and take the pressure off those meal times. So, just to show a couple of examples of finger foods now. So when it comes to finger foods, yes, we do recommend offering those alongside. Even if you're offering these kind of purees, we would still be recommending offering finger foods alongside those. What we want the finger foods to look like is ideally, roughly at the start of weaning, roughly the size and shape of an adult finger. But we also want them to be squidgeable. So they should be roughly this shape so that baby can grab them in the palm of their hand and munch off of the top of them. At around 6 months of age, a baby will only have a palmar grasp, which means they can only grab things in their palm like this. They can't pick anything up with their fingers because they don't have the dexterity. So that's why bigger pieces of food are really important and can help baby to self-feed. So they'll be able to grab those pieces of food and bring them up to their mouth and munch on them. As long as they are squidgeable, and that basically means that you can use your finger and thumb to squidge them and they will go flat when you do that. I'll show you an example of that right now. But as long as you can do that, it means that baby's gums, even if they have no teeth, baby's gums will be able to manage that. The gums are super hard. They don't need teeth to be offered finger foods, especially if they're nice and soft finger foods, just like the ones that I have got here. Let's see if this works. Yeah, there we go. So you can see some of these are some of my favorite ones. So you've got broccoli, avocado, cooked potato, really well cooked carrot, cauliflower, green beans, courgette with the skin removed, soft jelly parts of cucumber. These are all some really, really great very first finger foods for baby. You can overcook them a little bit so they are really nice and squidgy. And when I talk about being squidgy, this is the kind of texture that you want to see. So you can see again, with my thumbs are squidging this potato, and you can see how easily it goes flat. So that means if it's in baby's mouth, they will be able to crush this really easily, move it around in their mouth if they need to, and then swallow it without there being a risk of choking or them not being able to manage to eat it. So that's really, really important for a baby's first finger foods. So carrying on with my conversation on textures, you can see here, so if you look at the bottom right-hand side of this picture, you can see the green puree. Now that again is quite a thin, liquidy puree. I've offered some finger foods, so you've got some broccoli and some potato finger foods alongside that. You can also see as we move up, it's a bit more mashed. There's a bit less liquid in that texture, and you've got some cauliflower finger foods with it. And then we're moving on to more mince. So that might be where you take the back of a fork, and instead of blending something, you might take the back of a fork. As long as it's really nice and cooked and soft, you can give it a really good mash, and that would be an okay texture for baby. And then we're moving on to more chopped. So you're taking kind of more complex foods. Maybe they've been cooked a little bit less, and you're giving them a really good chop with a knife so that baby's still able to eat them, whether it be with their hands or with a spoon, but you're moving through those textures. And the same here as well with these finger foods. You can see we're also thinking about how to move through finger foods. So I started off with recommending veggie sticks that have been really nicely cooked, that are nice and soft. Other things like salmon, pasta can make really good finger foods too. So anything that's naturally quite soft and easy to come out. Also things like egg yolk is a really nice crumbly finger food for baby to try. And it gives lots of experience with different textures. Here are some other ones. So when babies had a lot of experience with finger foods, you do want to start moving on. So you can see things like potato tops, sticks of pancakes that, again, baby might need to just gum a little bit, but as long as they've had experience with those finger foods, they should be okay at managing things like this. And we've got a couple of muffins, all chopped into nice strips for baby to be able to hold and munch with their hand. So these are all textures that once a baby has had a bit of experience and been through lots of those veggie sticks, they should be able to start moving on to foods like this. So what are next steps in the weaning journey? We've talked about veg-led weaning. We've talked about offering different textures, starting with thin purees and moving through to thicker textures. And we've talked about offering finger foods and what those finger foods should look like. So when we talk about next steps of weaning, we're talking about kind of moving baby from those very early days through to the kind of next stages. So we want to be building on those textures. And again, the Zebedees purees, that's exactly what they do. They have a stage 1, stage 2, and a stage 3 of their purees. And we're trying to encourage that we kind of move through those textures as baby develops their eating skills and their ability, so that you're making sure they're exposed to all of that texture so they can learn to bite, chew, swallow, what to do with these pieces of food in their mouth. We also need to be thinking about plenty of variety. So I've mentioned variety a lot, and it is so key to get babies used to it. And again, for those of you who already have Zebedees food at your nursery, you will know that the variety that is on offer on the Zebedees menu is insanely good. There is so much variety within each and every day and week of their menu. And that's for a reason. It's because we know that variety is hugely important. At this stage as well, we really need to be focusing on a lot of those iron-rich foods. So things like eggs, beans, lentils, pulses, meat, fish are really important ones to be including on a more than a daily basis, so ideally within most meal times. We want to be starting to think about balancing those meals. And again, at Zebedees, their kind of stage 2 to 3 purees are really starting to build on those build on the textures, but also on the types of ingredients that we are including in those purees that we're offering. We also want to be encouraging more and more self-feeding. So the more you can get babies to start grabbing that spoon, using those finger foods to feed themselves, the better. It helps you at nursery, but it also helps them with their skill development, building those skills and knowing what to do. So there's plenty of stuff we need to be doing in terms of the next steps for baby. And here is one last example of a kind of transition through some textures. So with this one, we've taken a spaghetti bolognese, so something that you might very well get on the Zebedees menu. On stage 1, it's been really well blended all together. Stage 2, it's been kind of mashed really well with the back of a fork. Stage 3, we've really just taken a pair of scissors to it and it's just been chopped up nicely. And stage 4, it's pretty much whole, but the spaghetti has been chopped up really well, so it's in a lot smaller pieces for a baby who can then fork it and be able to put it in their mouth via a spoon or a fork. So the reason I popped this in here is because I really wanted to show you, if you are using Zebedees menus, then there are ways that you can adapt Zebedees current menus to be able to offer those to young babies by blending, chopping, mashing, and just making sure that those textures are appropriate for the baby that you're serving and their age and stage. So, textures, just a little bit of a recap on everything I just said so that we can make sure that everyone is understanding where we are with textures. Ideally, we want to introduce these before 9 months of age. It's really important babies are exposed to lumps and bumps and pieces of food before then. They need experience and practice in order to learn how to eat. Just like those other milestones, we give them plenty of practice with walking, talking, crawling, but actually when it comes to food, we often don't give them as much experience. We don't need to start with a thin puree. Soft mash is fine, but we want to be moving through those textures fairly quickly. And as long as food is appropriately prepared, there's not going to be a risk whether you're offering finger foods or purees or thicker textures as well. And as I've already said, move through those textures nice and gradually. So I'm going to talk now about gagging versus choking. I know this is a real worry for nurseries. And I know it's something that's been in the news quite a lot recently. And obviously with a possible high influx of younger babies coming into your nursery settings in the next months or so, it might be something you want to consider and think about a little bit more. I think that there is a call for nursery staff to be sent on or to have some first aid training. And I think that is a really important thing that you can do for your staff. So where I've talked about it here, choking risk. I've talked about prepping staff. I think that getting staff knowledgeable, understanding first aid, knowing what to do in an emergency is absolutely critical to being able to cope in this kind of situation. So if you've got any staff who are working with babies all the time, if you've got lots of babies coming in who are going to be weaning and having food in your setting, ultimately any food babies can choke on. There's so many things you can do to reduce the risk of that, but doesn't mean that it isn't ever going to happen. So being first aid trained is really, really critical. So I think that's a really key thing. The second thing I've said here is prep baby. Now, what I mean by this is, as I said earlier, you can print off textures, progression charts, ask the parent, communicate with the parent as to what kind of texture the baby is having at the moment. Talk to them about the idea of at nursery you want to try and encourage them to move on through those textures, check that the family are okay, but make sure you know what baby stage is at when you start weaning them in a nursery setting. The other things we can do for baby, we need to make sure that they are developmentally ready. So they can hold their head and neck steady, they can use their hand to bring things up towards their mouth, and they have less of a tongue thrust reflex, so they're not pushing all the food back out with their tongue. If they've got those 3 developmentally ready signs, then it means baby is ready for solid foods. But we still need to pay attention to things like how baby is sitting. They need to be sitting upright in a high chair so that they can actually rest their back and hold their head and neck steady. This means that they're less at risk of choking than if they were leaning forward or leaning towards the table, for example. They need to be sat upright. And to help them do this, a footrest on their high chair can be really helpful too. There should be someone sitting with them at all times during their eating and their feeding. It's really, really important. There's always someone with them. If you can, have role models around them so that they can see other people eating, because they'll learn a lot about biting and chewing and how to eat the foods that they're being given by having other people watch them. And the other thing to add to that is the prepping the food. So prep staff, prep baby, we also need to prep the food. So again, at Zebedees, we have provided you with stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 purees, which are specific for different stages depending on what the baby in your settings are at. Now, we don't know that, we can't predict that, but again, you can talk to parents and find out and then know whether you need to offer them a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. They go through, in terms of textures, they go from a nice thin puree or a kind of thin mash / puree to a thicker texture with much more lumps and bumps. So it really depends what stage the baby that you're going to be serving is at. But there still might need to be some adaptations. And just with all of the foods that are on Zebedees menu, we send it out and we take a lot of care about how we have prepared the food, how soft the food and the pieces are, how big the piece sizes are as well. But it might be that a baby or a child in your setting still needs that meal to be slightly adapted. And that's why it's super important to be having that communication with the parent, so that when you get the meal in front of you, you can see whether that is appropriate for that baby to be eating. There may be things that you need to do to still adapt the food, adapt the meal slightly to make sure it is more suitable to baby. So this might be mashing it more, this might be chopping up bigger pieces, this might be giving it a blend if you really feel like you need to with a hand blender or something, or it might just be slicing things a little bit thinner, making them a little bit more able for your child to have. But again, as I said, Zebedees do go above and beyond to try and make sure that everything we offer you is in line with recommendations, and I'll show you that in a moment. But first of all, just to show you this chart, I absolutely love this because I think it's a real great visual of some of the foods that are the biggest choking risk and how we can prep them. So for example, sausages, cutting them into really thin strips, not just cutting them in half. You want to cut them in half and then in quarters again. Things like dried fruit should be chopped really well, or they can be soaked to make them a little bit softer. Big, large beans, again, they can be cut a little bit or given a mash with the back of a fork. Things like cheese could be grated, and there's things like hard foods like carrots and apples, also giving those a little grate can really, really help with the textures. For younger babies, a lot of those foods might still need to be blended because things like carrots are quite hard texture, and the same with apple. You might want to cook that apple a little bit to make it a bit softer for baby. But there's usually ways that you can prep some of these choking risk foods before offering them to baby. And this chart just hopefully helps to show some visuals around that. So reducing the risk of choking, again, just to recap on what I said, and also just to add to it as well, when we talk about choking versus gagging, choking is very different to gagging. And actually, if I move on to this slide, I can kind of show you that. So choking is very much something we need to prevent. Gagging is very normal. It can be a really normal part of the weaning journey, and some babies gag a lot more than others. Gagging, often you'll hear a noise. Baby will be moving their body forward and trying to get that food out of their mouth. You'll see them actively trying to do that when they're gagging. For a baby who is choking, they normally go quite silent or quite quiet. You'll see they struggle to breathe, and there probably won't be much noise coming out. So we normally use this line, which is loud and red, let them go ahead, because they're probably trying to get rid of the food themselves. Quiet or blue, they need help from you. And that's really key to remember when it comes to that gagging and choking. So again, first aid training for all, really important. Make sure we're serving appropriate food for baby's age and development. This might need to be adapted. Communicate really well with parents when they come into the nursery about babies eating, feeding, and how they're getting on. Always sit with their baby when they're eating anything. Ensure they're safely in a high chair, sitting nice and upright, and encourage lots of practice for their skill development at home and in nursery as well. So that's just to recap what I said about that. Now, in terms of what I said about Zebedees and prevention choking, so this is all in the Zebedees handbook, so you can see this here. There's a whole section on children under 1. We have a chart here which talks about how we serve vegetables, meat, sausages, fruits, dried fruits, raw foods, and round foods, and how we make sure that when we are sending them into your setting, they are appropriate. They are presented in the right way. So, for example, things like fruits, harder fruits like apple will be cooked to make sure they're soft. The piece size of things like vegetables or meat will be appropriate. Dried fruits won't be offered on their own ever, and if they are offered, they're normally soaked and added into baked goods as well. So there's lots of things that we do, and these are all in line with the Food Standards Agency's early years choking hazard document. You can absolutely access, if you want to email us in, we can send you a copy of that if you would like to see it. It's actually a really good document and really, really useful to have on hand as well. But as I said, Zebedees go above and beyond to try and do that for you. It just might be that there are certain babies or toddlers who maybe need further adaptation that you might need to do in the nursery. Also in our handbook, we have information on how you can adapt our current meals that are on offer. So the meals that maybe you're serving to the toddlers or in toddler or family rooms, you can adapt those to be able to offer them to baby. And we just offer a couple of examples in there as well, so you can see exactly what we mean about doing that. But yeah, as I said, this information is all in the handbook and can be really, really handy. So last but not least, on the topic of choking and just being ultra safe, like I said, sorry to drum this in, but adults should always be there when baby is eating, never leaving baby alone in the high chair. Babies need to be seated, like I said, with ideally their feet on a stool and their back on a backrest so that they are comfortable. They should be able to focus on their hand movement and not on keeping themselves upright. Don't want any bibs that are going to restrict their movement or get in the way. That's really key. We don't want them walking around or moving whilst they're eating, and I know at most nurseries you wouldn't be doing that anyway. Making sure everything is cleared away, so minus distractions. If a baby is eating with distractions, looking at lots of things in the background, they're not going to be focusing on that biting and chewing, which is a very, very new skill that they actually need to concentrate on. And as I said, kids eating together really, really helps with that observation and that learning about how to eat. So that's everything about the kind of biting, chewing, adapting foods, moving through textures, finger foods. Of course, if you have any questions, I will absolutely answer them. I'm just going to talk to you for the next couple of minutes about some of the Zebedees menus. So many of you will know that Zebedees have brought out some brand new purees. As I've mentioned already, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about this. But again, if you guys have any questions in the next couple of minutes, we're going to do a Q&A and we'll answer all of your questions on this topic. So what's the idea behind Zebedees purees? We wanted to make sure that we're kind of ticking those boxes of trying to help babies to learn to eat, learn to bite, chew, swallow, but also offering that variety that I always talk about when it comes to feeding babies. We want to make sure that the meals we're offering them are nice and balanced. vary in texture, but helping also to familiarise with a lot of the foods that the babies and the toddlers are going to be having as they get older too. So we're trying to include lots of Zebedees typical food and ingredients, so that actually when your children move up to toddler room, they're more likely to be familiar with the ingredients and accept Zebedees food at that point as well. They're balanced and nutritious. The textures are appropriately prepared depending on the age and stage. They're cost effective, and we do recommend finger foods to serve alongside them as well. So a few examples of Zebedees puree versus what we actually see in the shops and what the difference is. So we freeze them to preserve the nutrients of them, and also that allows you to have flexibility with if and when you offer them to babies. So you can have a whole box of them that you can store in the freezer, and you can pop out 1 or 2 or however many you need each time, and they stay frozen, which is really good because, as I said, it does help to preserve the nutrients in the food. You can serve many of the cubes as you like. It's going to really vary from baby to baby. Some babies at the start of weaning may only need 1 cube, but actually as they get older they might need more, and you might have some babies who are really hungry, have a really big appetite. We've talked about portion sizes on these webinars before, so make sure you go and check those out on Zebedees YouTube channel as well. You can definitely have a look at some of those webinars where we talk a lot more about portion sizes, but ideally what we want to be doing is just responding to baby as how much they need and trying to offer an appropriate amount. They're all made with fresh ingredients, no preservatives, and there's a lot less packaging. And also the packaging, just to add to that, is very beautiful too. Zebedees purees again versus what's in the shop. No sugars, no sweeteners, and we haven't in the savoury options. There's no sweetness added. Sometimes when you buy the fruit pouches, you might get something like a spaghetti bolognese, and there's some apple sauce in there to make it a little bit sweeter, which isn't really what we recommend. So no added extra fruits where it's not needed. They help babies with developing their feeding skills. They offer a really wide variety of flavours, and they're cost effective too. So last slide from me. Again, when we're talking about Zebedees purees and what we're going to be offering, it's really important that all staff who are working with the baby are familiar with what the baby is needing, what stage they're at. Discuss food the baby has and hasn't tried at home, ideally with the parents. See, sometimes parents get really nervous because they think, well, why do they eat all this at nursery but not at home with us? So actually having some discussion, writing down information, allowing parents to see what's going on at nursery can be really helpful. So clear records so staff can access it, especially if children have any specific difficulties or struggling with certain textures. It's really important to make a note of it, and again have that conversation with the parent, and then understand any of the parents' worries at home. Try and offer support and as much information as you can. Now I know all this is easier said than done, because you guys at nursery have a huge amount of work to do. But I think when it comes to this kind of topic, and if you are getting a lot more younger babies coming into your nursery, it's really important to allow parents to know that you're taking this seriously, you know what you're doing, and to, again, have that communication open. So I hope that makes sense as to everything we said. I absolutely loved running this for you. This is my favourite topic. If you have questions, honestly, you can ask them now. We're going to be available to have a chat, ask any of your FAQ questions. But also, if you want to ask us something later, please do. Just email Zebedees or email your contact that you have there, or you can email me directly, however, and we will help to answer your questions. So thank you very much, and do hang around because the Q&A is often where we get lots and lots of really nuanced questions answered. Thank you. I welcome Alistair from Zebedees, who's also going to help me with answering some of the questions. So I'm going to pop into the Q&A box at the top. If you guys have any questions, please do pop them in there. If anyone's written them in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just copying and pasting them, because we've got a lot of things up on the screen here, so it would be really good to see that. So the first question, can I use purees alongside your standard menus?
Yep, absolutely. Obviously, everything's adaptable. You can use finger foods alongside the purees with the rice or the pasta. Other settings would mix the rice or the pasta with one of the purees.
Yeah.
Just obviously leave them and give them different textures and flavours. So, yeah.
And I think as well, you know, one of the things we have really tried to do is recommend finger foods alongside them. So as much as you can is, you know, and it is exactly that. If you've got a puree that's a thinner puree and baby can take a little bit more, you could take some of the kind of bread fingers, maybe they'll be perfect as a finger food, or mix some in with some of the, some rice. So many different things that you can do. So yeah, that's a really good question and something we really do want to kind of help with. How many cubes do you recommend for a 6-month-old? Do you want to?
It all depends, obviously, how much that child will eat. We can't dictate. We can recommend and advise, but obviously it's down to the parent, the child, the setting, the nursery, and what you think is adaptable. All the boxes come with 48 cubes in the box, so it's entirely up to you. You could start with 2, 3, and then obviously find if the child needs a bit more, obviously defrost and reheat, have a bit more.
Okay. So. Brilliant. This is a good question as well. Do soft finger foods arrive with the frozen purees or with the main nursery lunch? I think you kind of answered that earlier. But what I would say is that, there are aspects of the other lunch that you can use as finger foods. We don't actually offer finger foods with the puree, so we don't deliver them with the purees because it's just not possible for us to. But that's why we make suggestions, and often as well as part of the meal, we have plenty of options that you can use. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, fab. Sorry, I'm just clicking down to more questions. Oh, someone's asked, how do you order the purees?
Yep, so you can order daily, weekly. We ask for everyone's order on the Thursday for the following week, and you can literally just go onto your order, add extras, and add the purees onto there, or email client services and we can add them for you. You can order up until 12 o'clock the day before if you need the purees for the next day. It's not a problem. They all arrive frozen, transported in a freezer compartment in the freezer box in the vehicle, ready for you to put into your freezer. The shelf life is 6 months, so they're very well stocked. Lots of settings would just have them in the freezer just as a backup. So if they do have weaning children, obviously they can just take them out and reheat them.
Okay, brilliant. And can you mix and match flavours?
Unfortunately not. So we do, as Charlotte already said, we do 3 stages. So we do a plain fruit, then we do a plain veg, then we do a meat and veg, which will be stage 2, and then stage 3, which include a carbohydrate, so potato, rice, pasta, and that's how we sell them. So
but you could, for example, if you had a box, you could take 2 different of the thingies and combine those together.
Yeah, you'd have to order a box of fruit and a box of meat and veg, for example, and then just
and then mix them up. Yeah. So you can definitely
lunch
do that.
And tea, for example.
And the more variety, the merrier, of course. Does spaghetti for babies need to be chopped? That's a good question. Yes, I would definitely say it does, especially for young babies. I mean, I showed you that texture chart with the spaghetti bolognese. So at the very beginning, it's like very well mashed. I would personally take a kind of take a hand blender to it at the very beginning and give it a really good mash, so when babies are just starting out. And then as they get more experience, I mean, that's still quite a lumpy, nice texture for them, and there's going to be tiny little bits of pasta in there. And then as they get more exposed to a variety of foods and have plenty of finger foods, I'd be starting to kind of take that with the back of a fork and just give it a really good mash up. And then once they're accustomed to that, then again, you might want to stop doing that and just start chopping it a little bit. Sometimes I've quite literally taken scissors to a food, especially with something like spaghetti, and just like snip through it so that you're making them a little bit smaller. And then eventually I would say that a spaghetti, for maybe from 1+, again, depending on their skill and their eating ability, they might be able to sort of grab bits of spaghetti and shove them in their mouth, which I remember both my kids doing quite early on. But yeah, it really will depend on the baby's age and stage. But for precaution, I would definitely say to give that spaghetti a nice chop through. So, can you give babies eggs, hard-boiled in slices, and also banana egg pancakes for finger food? Yes, absolutely. There's actually new recommendations with young babies to try and introduce them to allergens like egg and peanut early on during the weaning journey. So again, communication with parents, really, really key, really important. If they haven't tried those allergens, I wouldn't be the one at nursery to be offering it to them for the very first time. I would definitely be wanting that baby to have been exposed to the allergens at home. But once they have, as long as they don't have not had any reaction, eggs are a really great, really nutrient-dense food to serve. The one thing I will say though is that egg whites can be quite hard, they can be quite gaggy and a bit of a choking hazard. So personally, I would cut them thinly. So I think you said here, boiled and then sliced up, perfect. Nice and thin slices will be really easy to eat. Like I said, the egg yolk is really good. It's very crumbly. It's a really easy food to have for baby. It obviously isn't the right kind of size and shape, but even so, a ball shape is still a really nice texture for babies to try and eat. Or absolutely added to pancakes or in their food as well is, again, a really, really good option. This all comes, again, communication with the parents is super important, so you know what they have and haven't had. You do want to know if they've been exposed to those allergens, ideally before kind of coming to nursery. At what age can babies eat fish from? So this is the same thing again. Fish is another allergen, but absolutely from around 6 months of age, definitely can offer fish in the diet. We'd recommend that parents at home offer it as per allergen in guidelines, so tiny amount for the very first time as the only new food that baby tries that day, so that you can see if there is a reaction. But yes, ideally parents will be trying the fish at home.
And we also have them in our purees as well.
And there's fish in the purees. There's salmon, isn't there? Salmon in one of them. And in a lot of the Zebedees foods, you probably will have, if you've got the Zebedees menu, we do offer fish in the menu. We offer it in really great ways, so it's not that sort of obvious to babies and toddlers, but it's still very much there. But yeah, you can definitely offer fish nice and early on. So we've got another one here. I take it we just order the stages that our babies are at.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we do the 3 stages, as we talked about, so stage 1, 2 and 3, and you just order literally accordingly what you'd like to have, and then we just obviously deliver.
Perfect. I also presume it's 48 blocks of stages 1, 2 or 3.
That's correct, yeah.
Sorry, I've got another question coming through. What ages are your purees suitable from and to?
Again, it's always age-dependent, parent
communication.
Communication, like Charlotte said. But we can start from 4 or 5 months right up to sort of 9 months, depending on the age of the child.
And depending on those signs of readiness.
Yeah, exactly, like you said.
Baby needs to be ready for weaning. Obviously, if they're weaning at home, again, communication with the parent. When are they starting? Have they seen those signs of readiness? And then starting to offer the food. But yeah, you can offer it from when baby starts weaning and showing those signs right through until what age would you say?
Well, obviously one for our
purees, purees. And that's when they'll then go on to the Zebedees standard menus.
Pork it down, pulse it, whatever consistency. Pulse it down.
Whatever you need to do.
Consistency you'd like.
Yeah, perfect. How do I make the transition from Zebedees purees to Zebedees lunches? That's a great question.
So obviously, Charlotte said again to start with the stages, and then literally just introduce our main meals. You can fork it down, pulse it, blitz it, whatever consistency you'd like, and then just introduce it slowly, and obviously the different textures and sort of size of the child. So.
Perfect. So there's a good question here as well. Are there any high-risk finger foods to avoid, or can they all be offered if prepared safely? So obviously I showed you that slide of the high-risk foods that we wouldn't want to offer. So things like whole nuts, whole grapes, big dried fruit, big beans, also I think I said dried fruit, whole kind of raw apples and raw carrots, trying to think, olives as well. So there's lots of foods that they aren't appropriate because of their size and shape. And hot dogs, as you've mentioned there, these foods are all choking, more of a risk of choking. So that ideally we don't want to be offering them to babies. There are ways you can adapt them to offer them to babies, but it obviously depends on baby stage. So just as an example, a 6-month-old baby shouldn't have a whole grape, absolutely not. And actually the recommendation with some of those shaking foods is more like 4 and 5 years of age before they're having whole grapes or whole olives, for example. But actually a young baby who's around 6 months also won't be able to have chopped sliced grapes. It's too much for their kind of texture. So those kind of things, chopped sliced grapes, I would be leaving till at least 1+. Also things like hot dogs, again, as I recommended, something like a sausage. The Zebedees do sausages that are made to our own specification, that are very low salt, that are made soft, and the skin around them also breaks down very easily. But we still recommend that when it gets to you, that you slice those through the middle so that it's in half, and then you slice them into quarters, and that stops that having the kind of round end. And again, they would be fine for babies as finger foods if they're served and chopped appropriately. But yes, there are lots of foods. So for example, hard carrot sticks, hard apples, we wouldn't be recommending they're served to babies or toddlers, to be honest. So all of these things will need adapting. And then having a look at what baby's own eating skills and abilities are. If you've got a baby who doesn't have finger foods at home at all, then offering them something like a well-cooked, slice of egg might be a challenge for them. So it all depends on what the babies are also used to, if that makes sense. Okay, we answered that one, didn't we? How do you transition?
Yep.
How are the purees stored and what's their shelf life?
Stored, so...
You've got a box?
Yeah, I've got a little box here. So they come like this. This is stage 1. So just like this, wonderful box. Open it up. You've got the reheating guidelines in there and the actual purees there.
Yeah.
So they're transported like this, all frozen. And then you literally just take out accordingly what you need. On the actual bag itself, you've got the ingredient, the item itself.
Apple and raspberry.
Then they just sit in your freezer up to 6 months in there, and then you just take out what you like.
Perfect.
And just pop back.
They're very beautifully presented, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they're lovely.
But yeah, you can order which ones you like, can't you?
Yep.
And you can choose the selection that you want within the box. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we've done that one. Are there any alternatives for babies with allergies or cultural preferences?
So allergy-wise, there's no added ingredients or preservatives in any of the purees at all. Obviously, in the stage 3, we've got gluten and fish, so they're the only allergens actually we obviously declared in there. And then you can order, obviously, the
other ones that don't have those.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also, Zebedees menus are really, really good for those of you who are with Zebedees already, you'll already know, but very, very good for allergens. Do you want to just talk really briefly about
so we
the ability of
concentrate on the
selecting?
14 core allergens. So if whatever you require, obviously you order it. We have our online ordering system called Zoo, and that will actually filter out what's relevant and what's not relevant. So if you order a dairy-free and there's dairy in that particular dish, obviously we'll send a separate dish. If not, it will be included in the main meal. Obviously, we cater for a lot of allergens.
Yeah, so, a lot of allergens, and do very, very complicated, good job at it as well. So this is another good question. We have some parents who are worried about serving finger food. Should we be encouraging them to do this at home? So first of all, I would be recommending communication. I know I've banged on about it, but it's super, super, super important. See what is happening at home, because if the baby is having finger foods at home, it is good to offer it. Second of all, that's why I mentioned about staff being first aid trained. It's so important to know what to do if something does happen, and that can help staff confidence as well. Also, letting them know about gagging versus choking. If they haven't seen this webinar, maybe show this to them. They can have a look at the textures. They can understand what baby needs in terms of developing those oral motor skills. There's lots that you can do to try and boost staff's confidence as well as young children's confidence. It can be nerve-wracking, but again, looking at those finger foods, size and shape of adult finger, squidge between finger and thumb, and as long as you're getting that nice squidge and you can flatten it, it's likely that a baby will be able to do that themselves quite readily. However, if you have got staff that are nervous, or if parents aren't happy with it, definitely encouraging those finger foods at home. And again, there's fact sheets you can give, or we've got, you can offer worksheets or information to parents to help them understand what they should be doing at home in terms of offering different textures. But it's so important to be offering finger foods nice and early on, and hopefully staff will be able to boost confidence by just kind of reading some of that material. But that again is a really good one. And if you want any more advice or information on this, please contact Zebedees.
We've got that, and obviously we can advise you and send any literature we have for you. So.
Yeah, and we've been talking about first aid, haven't we? So if there's something you'd be interested in, again, let us know. Some parents bring in baby food pouches. How would you say your purees are better than these?
Obviously, all ours are natural. There's no preservatives in them. They're frozen, so you literally take out how many portions accordingly.
The other thing to add is that we at Zebedees, we have more, because we make them in-house, we have the ability to be able to alter the textures quite well, whereas with the baby food pouches, they all generally have to kind of come out of the top of that little spout, so they're very limited in terms of piece size. Yeah. So we've really tried to make sure that the textures are varied from one to the next to the next, so you're really moving baby through that. But actually quite often with baby purees, they are quite thin, they're not the right texture you would want, and they're also preserved, so they don't, if you try them, they don't really taste like real food, whereas this tastes like real food.
Yeah, they're vibrant, they're like...
vibrant, lots of colours. Yeah. And again, the other thing that's the benefit is that it matches the kind of ingredients, as I said, that we also have at Zebedees, which I think is really key, because if you want your toddlers to be eating the food that's on offer, which we know that you will do, then getting them familiar with those ingredients early on is great. And if they've been used to a food pouch, and this is something I talk to about parents all the time, if they've been used to a food pouch, it actually doesn't taste very much like a lot of other foods, and babies can get quite stuck on certain food pouches, and it can be really hard to kind of move them forward onto adult food and family food. So it's a really nice transition to do it this way. So does normal size pasta need cutting? We often do for our younger children. Is this necessary? So again, it really depends on the baby, the age, the stage, what they're used to. If your babies have been having pasta at home and they can eat it whole as it is, then absolutely fine. If you think that actually babies are not quite at that stage yet, they might need it mashed, they might need it chopped. You don't necessarily need to, no, but it depends on what textures that baby is used to. So it's really impossible to be able to answer it.
Yeah, it's entirely up to you. Obviously, we'll send it whole, obviously, and then it's up to you, the setting. You're the last person to actually feed the child if the child's supervising the children. So as long as they're being supervised.
Yeah. And you can kind of adapt it based on what you
absolutely.
think. But you won't necessarily need to be cutting. Actually, sometimes pasta can make really great finger foods as well. So you could offer a bit on the side and then chop or mash a little bit up, depending on the baby's age, stage, development. So, for example, a 6-month-old baby who's just started weaning definitely wouldn't be able to manage whole pasta pieces just yet. But maybe a couple of little ones on the side for them to offer as a finger food, and then the rest of it kind of mashed up would be what I would recommend. But again, really good question. Okay, should under ones avoid desserts? Well, that's a whole other topic. That's a whole other topic. Not necessarily. At Zebedees, we do offer.
Yeah, obviously we've got the stage 1 fruit purees. That obviously you can use for the babies. Alternatively, obviously we don't add any refined sugar to any of our second courses.
There's lots of, and I think we do an option where if you want to, we can offer fresh fruit as well as an alternative.
That's right, fruit pudding only.
Yeah, fruit. So you can do fruit pudding only. It depends on what is on offer, and again the stage of the baby. But I think it depends what the baby's used to at home, what you guys want to do at your own nursery. We do say that you can offer a lot of the puddings or the second courses can be offered, because most of them don't have anything in terms of sugar, salt, or they're all made here. They all have lots of extra vegetables and lots of extra fibre generally added to them. So they're really good options. But actually, for under ones, if you want to, you can absolutely ask for just fresh fruit.
The fruit purees.
You've got
so
the
we
fruit
do
purees.
the fruit boxes as well. We do the gourmet, standard fruit box, and deluxe. So again, you can order that from us. Just again, add it to your order. So.
Perfect. Do we know what the puree is in the box so we can tell parents what they have?
Yes, absolutely. It's written on the actual bag itself.
On the bag. So this one says apple and raspberry. It says it right across here. And then, what's the one below? So you've got apple. This is the fruit box. They are veggie boxes as well. And this one's pear. So it says it right luckily on the bag that it will be kept in the fridge on. So you should always be able to see that. Yeah. So I think we probably need to call that to an end. But honestly, you guys have been brilliant. Excellent questions. Really, really thorough. And it shows that you guys, are really interested and keen. So please do get in touch with us. Any questions, choking, first aid, moving through textures, finger foods. We've got tons of resources we can send you. If you've got questions for Zebedees about the purees, please do get in touch, because, we've got, we can send you fact sheets and lots of information, or possibly samples to try as well.
Yep.
So, but thank you so much for taking part. Any final?
No, Charlotte said any questions, or obviously please, order them, try them out. But they are brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. Take care. Thanks
Bye-bye.
for being here. I absolutely love that. Just had a really great session for Zebedees, all about weaning in a nursery setting. If you've got any questions at all, just contact us at Zebedees HQ and we'll answer all of your questions.